right. So, good evening, everybody. This is Guru Tom Pena for FMA Discussion, episode 268. And tonight we have Suro Jason Inay of the Inayan Screamer. Okay, so good evening, Suro Jason. Okay,
Hello.
so once again, guys, if you're watching this interview with Jason Inay, please tell us where you're watching from. Say hi, and if you got any questions for Suri Jason, don't hesitate to put it in the comment box. And please smash the heart button or the like button. And if you happen to miss this out, and if you know people will be interested to watch this interview, please direct your friends to the FMA discussion YouTube account. Okay, so. Good afternoon, Sir Jason.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming into the show, and you were highly recommended by Guru Roger Agbulos. Okay.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
And yeah, I interviewed him before I went to the States actually, and we had a great interview, especially regarding using movements, mechanics, biomechanics for sparring and for fighting. So yeah, um, yep. Okay, so we got Guru Ace Ramirez from New Jersey.
Hi.
Hi, Guru Ace. Okay, so um, let's get started. Would you be able to tell us your martial arts journey? So from just plain martial arts to FMA, if that's the case, or the other way around. So
It's really the other way around. So I don't remember starting when my cousins say I started. I started, according to them, when I was about 4. My father was my teacher, and my uncles, and it was more like playing. And I didn't really formally take lessons and wear a uniform and all that stuff, which was really just a class shirt, until I was about 6. So that's about 1979. And went into training and attending classes as a 6-year-old. And it was a very old way of teaching, so you couldn't really move on from one technique or another until you had an opportunity to show that you had some skill and that you were, proficient enough for your age or for your skill set or your experience. In this case, 6-year-old boy, right? And for the most part, I was allowed to train for as long as I had attention. And then as I got older, I started attending classes, and it was 2 to 3 classes a week. They usually ended up being about an hour and a half to 2 hours at minimum.
mm-hmm.
And and then we seminars and stuff like that. And so when I got older, you weren't. So with my father, you weren't allowed to become an advanced student, which is our 3rd level. It's a silver medallion, which is a kind of like our nod to the unting, as opposed to wearing a belt. The sash that you see me wear in some of my pictures is something that my father tried to put into place prior to his death, and I was the only student that really supported the Grandmaster.
Okay.
Direction. My point of view is if the head of the system, in this case my father, decided it wanted to go one way or another, then you just teacher says, student does, right? That kind of thing. So I didn't become an advanced student. That's when you get your basic diploma in the 9 system of Eskrima, because there was no really officially a 9 Eskrima. My father founded one system that's a 9 system of Eskrima, and he founded one organization, the Inayan Training Organization. No other organization system other than the West Coast Eskrima Society and things like that. Those are other organizations that he was a part of. So I couldn't become a guru until I was 18, and that was in 92. Yeah. And I had actually started teaching prior to that, afternoon classes and stuff, and helped run the school at the time, and helped him take that school from not making money to breaking even and just making a little bit of money in a 6-month period of time. He had the part of his process of teaching me to become an instructor is he he sent me out to school owners, and they would educate me on that side of managing a school. And then he made sure I was responsible and helped in running tournaments and things like that as I was younger, and participating in all of those things. And then when it came time to prove myself to become an actual system head or whatever, his plan was for me to take the system 10 years after when he passed. So he passed when I was 27, and I was inspired to become which is our term for grandmaster or head of system, because he didn't believe in using that title. That's something that other people address you with, right? So until I was 37. So obviously I was a little early. So but like that requirement was, I wasn't allowed to use his name to open doors. I wasn't allowed to use any of his existing network to get seminars or to build any notoriety for myself. I had to go out and seek new relationships and build community and put myself out there, and like that comes with the occasional challenge or the occasional rude shutting of the door and things, all of those things that anybody who's done a system had to move forward in life on their own and stand on their own, as opposed to stand on the coattails of some other man. That's what he made me learn. And so I did that. Right. And so I'm still involved in a number of organizations over the years, and been invited in others and acknowledged in others. And I think that's by and large because my father, among other things that I won't go into, he really made it sure that I had the right life experience to be out there and teach in front of people. That it wasn't just that I had a title or that my name is. I'm always going to be Inay, right? So like I couldn't rest upon that. I needed to prove myself. It took longer for me to usually get any kind of rank or title. Same thing for my sister, who's a very accomplished martial artist as well, master instructor herself, right? So, that was kind of like as far as like how my father oversaw my tenure and pedigree. He was in fact, he used that word pedigree a lot with me in his mentoring for me, right? And that was important for him because, people rank other people for power a lot, right? In the martial arts. I'm going to give you this master title, and you've only been training for 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is, right? And that's their criteria, which is fine, but he was very careful. So I wasn't actually allowed to train in other arts until I had become a guru. And then the first thing I did was I wanted to learn Tai Chi, right? His response was, just do your basics slower. And he was wrong. And he was right. He was exactly right. See, the thing is that the surface structure of that sentence is do it slow. The deep structure, what he's meaning is do it slow and perfect, which is what Tai Chi is.
Yes.
Like, Tai Chi is really just doing any of the typical martial arts movements that we see today. They're usually compound techniques, meaning that there are a number of things that are being achieved through the flow of that movement, right? Yeah. But they're done with absolute perfect body mechanics, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really learn. I've been practicing Tai Chi on and off since like 94, 93 or something like that. But I didn't learn anything truly new. It's like I didn't learn a different way to move my arm. I learned a new way to shuffle the same 52 cards in that deck, but I didn't learn anything new. What I did learn is a more precise way to shuffle that deck, right?
Yeah.
And that was useful because sometimes when we get to practical martial arts, people like, combat effective, street-based, or whatever term that they like to use, right? And what they're trying to communicate is a certain kind of efficacious quality to their martial art. We go back to, making sure it works, right? The problem is that adrenal training creates a lot of opportunity for us to make gross mistakes in body functionality at the sake of aggression, and it works against a typical opponent, right? But if you're going against a much more versed opponent, then you're going to need a better body mechanic. You need to be much more functional and biomechanically correct. I personally believe that when we see a beautiful technique, like when we see, like you mentioned, Guru Abulos, right? When we see him do something beautiful, there is a certain perfection in his body mechanic that our eyes and our brain interpret as symmetrical and balanced and perfect, right? We don't always see that when we watch a fight, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that the fight isn't effective. The fighters aren't working. It's just that it's working under that context. And when you get a better opponent, you're going to have to be better. And so I learned that through that Tai Chi, and it was a Shaolin Kung Fu school. The Grandmaster, I think he was out of, I don't think he was out of China. I think he was actually out of Malaysia. His name was Sin Kwang Pei.
Okay.
So it was an interesting experience, but my dad had this rule, like if he says, you can go, but when I say no, you have to stop. And he said no eventually, and I stopped, right?
Okay.
And then over the time, I built associations, as I mentioned before, with people in the Kempo and Jiu-Jitsu community. And I've been practicing Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, specifically Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu, under, at first, Daishihan Sid Kufaroth and his students, Russ Rhodes and Professor Hans Ingebretson, whom I still work with. And then specifically, I've been concentrating my time with that when I get a chance to, because it's fun to do other arts. It gives you perspective, right? It doesn't change my screamer or make my screamer diluted in any way, but it gives me some interesting things. And it's nice to change gears. Gives you time to take space. But Professor Steve Nichols, who's currently in Seattle right now, he's the guy that I work with the most with regards to that. So I got to do some of those things and move through there. I had an opportunity to teach a bunch of the students, a lot of the students that like more senior and as far as my father's concerned, because like he was like when he was passing, he's telling all of the students, if I'm gone, follow Jason. And a number of the very, very senior people stuck around. It's very natural for people to kind of split, and people want to be a grandmaster of their own, or they want to do something of their own for whatever reason, right? That they might use to justify their actions, right? But a number of them stayed, and one of them was a guy by the name of Evers Pepper. Has a combat Hapkido system, but he was the guy that brought Krav Maga to Korea. And so I got a chance to work with him and teach him for many, many years. And I still consider him a great friend and a student. He and I chat once in a while. He's actually one of Guru Egger's original teachers. How I met Guru Egger.
Oh, wow.
And so I've taught a little bit of Krav Maga over the years. It's a good adrenalized system, right? I personally don't like adrenalized system. I think that focusing on adrenal systems raises cortisol, which isn't healthy for you. And if you look at the old masters, ain't none of them adrenal. You watch videos of O Sensei, that guy looks calm as a still lake, and that's And so I look at that as my beacon or as my milestone. I watched my dad fight many, many times, and never once did I see him look stressed out when he was doing his full contact stick fight. Right. So I think that adrenal training is in where your milestones would be for training. If you stay there while your technique may work, right? It's like I tell people, well, what's the difference between CTAC and DEFTAC and like the different military tactics and all that other stuff. Like if you look at World War II era hand-to-hand combat, right? It's not very different what we see today. There's some variation. I mean, System is on one side, Krav is on another side, and you have McMap, and then there's Gung Ho Chuang Do or whatever it was called at one time. All these different arts, and they're an amalgamation of boxing, judo, karate, right? Maybe they have today. Generally speaking, most spec ops guys go after Sila and a screamer or collier earnings, whatever you want to call that, right? So, but generally it's gross motor functions, right? And you look at it and go, okay, well, generally in the West, 2 weeks of hand-to-hand combat. If you're doing PC 832 here in California, which is one of the courses you were asking about in order to do fugitive retrieval, the hand-to-hand, which they call arresting control tactics, it's a week, 2 weeks, or something like that. It's very little. It's inadequate is the best way to put that, right? If you really look at, dealing with, accelerated violence, if you will, right? So versus IDF's courses for Krav Maga, that's a 2-month course in their courses. So you look at the training and how it works and stuff like that, and it's very interesting. It had definitely educated me in my process in my journey, which is the discussion at hand, right? As far as understanding how I should organize the training. My father felt that someone who's coming to learn the Inayan system of Eskrima should be able to defend themselves within a short few months. I feel like that could be achieved in the 2 weeks that the military do it
Mm-hmm.
if you approach it
Yeah.
correctly. But you have to do your research, and you have to,
Yeah.
honestly, if you don't have experience fighting and dealing with the different kinds of fights. I mean, there's different kinds of fights. There's the fight where the guy wants to run away. He just wants to get away. The
Yeah.
fight where they're fighting someone else. The fight where they're trying to get at someone else and you're trying to prevent that from happening. The fight where they just want to dominate you but they don't want to kill you. The fight for face, right? So that they don't feel like they've been disrespected. And then there's the fight where they're trying to.
Yeah. This. Yeah.
Having had an experience in most of those, right? It informed my Eskrima in my journey, right? And then
Wow. Okay.
I got to, I hated the first 10, 15 years that my dad was gone because I traveled 99% of the time alone. And
Okay.
so the positive from that is I got to teach, and I've taught in the Philippines, I've taught in Japan, I've taught in the Middle East, I've taught all over Europe, I've taught here in the United States and up in Canada and things like that. And I got to experience people's approach. I got to experience people's, life experience, to get them to share their anecdote, how that might inform my training, and whether they like something else versus what I like, and because there's no single truth, right?
Of course.
Simply
Yes.
because
Exactly.
there's too many variations in body mechanics, right? Some people have longer torso, right? Or they
Yeah.
have longer arms, or heavier. Maybe
Yep.
they don't have the
That's true.
physicality they need to do a grappling match because the person that they're grappling is significantly heavier than them, right?
Yeah.
And martial arts is supposed to not make a fight fair. You're supposed to be able to use technique and your knowledge and experience to overcome a superior opponent, at least in size, and ideally in skill, if you take them out of the scope of their particular way of fighting, right? Which is why the United States Eskrima is organized the way it is, right? It's founded in the 1950s. There's long range, there's medium range, there's short range. We did full contact stick fighting way back. We're not famous for it. We don't televise videos for it because that's not our thing. But not a single guru that came under my father nor under me has gotten to become a guru without having full contact stick fighting, no padding, except for helmet gloves. Now that's inaccurate. Now I let people wear lacrosse gloves. I have a number of students that are surgeons and doctors and engineers, and if I don't want to be responsible for taking away their livelihood.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That they're a guru. That's not useful, right? So my journey has been going through that time, like Dragon's asking what it was like to be the son of a highly established master. It's both a burden and a boost. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name, Dragon, correctly. Big Phil, right? And that journey is like you have a boy who wants to be like his dad, who has to compete for attention with grown men who want to essentially treat this person as their dad. And so there's that competitiveness there, right? Which, looking back at it, I think is just preposterous, right? The idea that grown men would do that. But that's the reality. I mean, there's a number of people that go, well, he was just like my father. Well, actually, he was my father, right? So that's a difficult thing to do and still maintain this code of ethics that my father had, which was honor, respect, veracity, justice, ethic, loyalty, discipline, rule, and conduct. And I remain loyal to a lot of those precepts, all of those precepts that my father had, right? And so part of that was being able to not try to push for more attention when he had to put his attention there. Easier? No. My father despised nepotism, so he made it harder, right? He had said on a number of occasions I should have been at a higher level, right? And he had a different perspective as to what he expected of me and my sister, and he did that mostly so that people couldn't say later on, well, he's just the founder's son or the teacher's son.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So that definitely influenced my, and then I took that on to doing security and law enforcement, in my later years here as the head of the system, right? So that's the long and short of my journey. It's been a lot of fun. I'm still on that journey. I'm as I've stated on social media, I'm deep in what my uncle Danny calls the 12th area of Kali, which is spiritual and religious and love and, the internal things, learning more about myself on those levels, because that's a big part of your personal growth, right? So my dad had a similar perspective. He didn't categorize it that way. So, but he felt that was an important part of the development of the individual, someone who could, properly represent the culture, if not the system or the art itself. So that's, in essence, my journey. There's lots of stories. There's lots of things that I've done, things that I thought that I would never do. Like you're asking me about my fugitive retrieval, my bounty hunting experience. I never once thought, I'm going to be a bounty hunter when I grow up. No, I don't know if any kids like going, this is what I want to do, right? And I gathered a little bit of PTSD from all those experiences, mostly in having to witness human tragedy. But it was a good experience, right? Doing those things for me, more than anything else, other than providing me a means of living, was an opportunity to have a proof of concept, essentially, as to what the art is like. Working against people that like I ended up in a grappling match with a guy that was trying to stab me, right? I mean, that's fantastic experience. I'm lucky that I had a partner that kept that guy's hand out of his pocket, right? So, that was part of, so when I teach today, everything is colored by all of those experience. The boy that was 4 years old that learned to play with his uncles and thought it was just a thing that I did. The young boy that just wanted to be like dad because dad was his first superhero. To the teenager thought he knew more than his father, right? To the young man that had achieved in a point of time where he was no longer trying to achieve any kind of validation or approval from his father, but was trying to execute this example of what it meant to be a good person, as far as how my father, built that archetype for me, and then later when he passed, just trying to make him proud again and trying to be a credit to the name, right? While still dealing with the fallout of him passing, and then, the dissolution of different relationships that occurred through life when, you're gone all the time. And there was a period of time where I'm gone a month at a time, right? Where there are months that I missed of my daughter's, because I have one child, right? I missed months of her growing up, right? And so that's the cost of where I'm at now, right? Which I wouldn't grade, right? But I have to acknowledge the cost as well, and
of course,
evaluate and decide whether or not I really want to continue making those sacrifices for people, to be able to spread the art. Because ultimately, this art, I see Grandmaster Ron Saturno's on, right, and Master Alvin's on. Ultimately, for us, when we're teaching you as an instructor as well, and comes a point, at least in my perspective, where my art's not going to change. I'm not going to become worse if I don't teach, right? I'm not going to become, a lesser human being if I'm not out there in front of people and people, seeking out any kind of information from me. So now it's whether or not I want to pay that cost to continue to teach, right? To continue art and stuff. And so far I've continued to make that decision. Sometimes I regret the decision, but so far it's been good experience and has helped me grow as a human being. So that's, you can't buy that, right?
Well, of course. I mean, it's one thing good is your journey has been actually rich with experiences that help you to become who you are now. And of course, there are good and bad ones. So, one thing that I want to add when it comes to Tai Chi is one of the things that you take away from Tai Chi is to do things slow and with purpose. Yeah, I think that's one of the good thing about Tai Chi. And sometimes when I do my forms as well in Eskrima, I do it slowly, but because I do it with purpose, it actually helps you internalize. Same thing when I was like learning how to dance. Same thing. Have to do it slow, but make sure that you do it with purpose. So it helps
intent
you
is
get
a
that skill.
huge component.
It
Intent is a
is.
huge component in the art. Like, and then what you're holding in your mind at that time, what kind of um, emotion, because it's an art, right? So what emotion are
Mhm.
you trying to elicit from the opponent? What emotion are you
Yeah.
expressing, right? And then, like, what's your outcome that you're looking for? Because different styles define victory differently. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, standard Olympic wrestling, if I pin you, I win. That's my victory.
Yeah.
If I'm wrestling,
Yeah.
that's not
Exactly.
necessarily the victory that's not the definition of a victory in a gunfight, right? That's
Mm.
they're two different kinds of fights, right?
Mm.
If you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or if you're doing catch as catch can wrestling, right? They are very similar arts with completely different sets of goals in terms of how they may achieve a victory, and they have
Yeah.
completely different allowable tactics, right? And it's going to be the
Yeah.
same whether I'm doing Dose parts, right? Great art, great system. I had the fortune of meeting uh, Manon Cagnetti, Joni Cagnetti, right? And then I know some great people here in the Bay Area in California, and like Grandmaster Tom Sippin over in Wisconsin, right? Some great people, great art, right? The way that they define, if you look at the art and the way that they fight, the way they define a successful technique and how they win is very different, especially in light of the WCAF rules, right, or GSBA rules
Yeah.
if you're in that organization, right? Is
Hmm.
very different than, say, World War II Bolo Brigade against the Japanese.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
definition of victory is different. Does it make one better than the other? No, it's just that in that particular context, this is what we're working for, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't want
Exactly.
my students braining each other, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, I have to be able to illustrate to them, here's a technique that's viable, or here's a movement that's viable under this context, right? And in light of today's, ubiquitous camera, right? I remember I was a wrestling guy that was on PCP, and his mother and his father were videoing us at the same time, right? Like, the way that I'm going to have to approach this is going to be different than if we're in a dark alley, right?
Yeah.
Or
That's true.
even
That's very true.
qualification, but it's a tournament, right?
Mhm.
What's allowable, what is going to be, you have to consider your optics in those cases. You have to figure
Mhm.
out how you're going to achieve a victory that's, because like you don't want a Pyrrhic victory, right? That's going to cost you too much, right? So you have to consider, like, how am I going to achieve this tactically? What strategy overall is permissible
Yeah.
under this
Permissible.
context?
Yeah.
And then the grand strategy of what is my repercussion once I achieve victory, right?
Mhm.
And some people will argue, well, it's better to live than die. It's better than be judged by 12, 6, or 8, maybe,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Right. But, like, you're still not considering the other. I've been in 13 different jails. I've processed through 13 different jails, and I've never been on the other side of that intake wall, right? And I'd
Mhm.
like to keep it that way, right? So, like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's better
That's
to do
true.
that. I still don't want to be in jail, right?
Mm.
So
That's true.
that's my personal decision. Other people have to do
Mm.
that, and I've never been in a situation. I've been in life and death situations, but I've never been in a situation where I didn't consider that, right?
Mhm.
I've been in a situation where I didn't care, but it
Yeah.
wasn't, I didn't consider it. I still have to consider that because it's, you know, how is that going to look? How's that going to look for someone
Exactly. That's true.
who's supposedly good at fighting? Like, because a guy knows martial arts, been doing it since he was 4, whatever, right? How does that look if you just brutalize
I
someone?
know.
It doesn't look good, right?
It doesn't look good.
Does it serve the community? Does it serve Filipino
No, it doesn't.
arts? Does it serve my family art? No, it doesn't serve those
No,
things.
it doesn't.
So
No,
all of
that's true.
those things have to come into play when we decide how we might fight, and that all comes down to intent. What is
Mm.
my intention, right? And it starts with something like, oh, I'm just, because like you've been teaching, and some of the people that are listening have been teaching, right? You're doing this, and you can tell that the student is just trying to get through the technique to get to the next technique or the next drill or the next exercise for the next belt, title, or rank,
Mm.
whatever it is. That's okay
Yeah.
too. There's nothing wrong with being, achievement oriented or goal oriented, right? But, right, sometimes you miss all the pieces. And then
Yeah.
if
That's
you're
true. Yep.
lucky enough to make and can afford the cost, not the monetary cost, but the time and the relationship and the energy cost of continuing training, hopefully you have the memory to go back because you skipped through so many things because all you wanted to do is be called guru or whatever it is, which was never my concern. care about any of
Nah, same thing with me. Same thing with me.
it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so yeah, intent. I agree with you entirely that intent. I mean, like, we have Grandmaster Ron Saturno in there. Like, when you see him move, very intentful.
Yeah.
There's no mistaking what he's doing when
Mm,
he's doing it,
yeah.
right? So there's, I mean, I've been accused of being a little bit lax in my approach in the way that I teach and stuff, and that's born of, I broke a bunch of students earlier, and so I'm a lot gentler than the ways that I have maybe a control issue. I don't know. I don't think I do, but I had to.
Oh, sorry, folks. Suro Jason just cut off. Maybe he had some internet issues, but hopefully he'll be back. Yep. Thank you for tuning in. When he comes back, we're gonna say hi to all of you. Yeah, I was just about to say that I always watch Master Ron Saturnus videos. Oh, you got cut off.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what's going
Oh,
on. I didn't see any lag or anything. All of a sudden, I'm like, I'm off.
I know. Okay, yeah. Before we carry on, let's just say hi to those who have been watching. So we've got Lawrence Eugenio from California, Jolene Jeresa, Edgar says hi as well. Roby Tombaga from Portland, Nick Merchant, um, Kyle Campbell, Aubrey Carbonell, Patrick Pinson, Alvin Albano, Frank Chekowski, Greg Garcia. So, yeah, Kyle said one of my favorite local instructors.
How's good
Now,
people? He makes great training blades. Great training equipment.
yeah. I met him.
Very
I met him when I went to LA. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next time I'm in LA, I'm gonna make sure that I'll train under you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also about to say that.
You got somebody from Germany. I just asked him how he was.
All right. Hi, Carl Stark. Yeah, from Germany. So, yeah, I was about to say as well that I love watching Master Ron Saturnus videos, video clips, him teaching and him doing the stuff. Yeah, you see the intent. You see basically the clarity of the movement in him. So one of the people that I would love to like meet as well personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So okay. Not a lot of people might actually know what is Inayan Screama. Would you care to describe it? Or would you be able to like also give a little bit back the history of Inayan Screama? So
I mean, from a very human point of view, it's it's the genesis and body of work that I've carried on, right? But it's my father's body of work of a man that didn't have a lot of social acceptance, right? And was seeking to learn martial arts. He learned Chinese martial arts first, didn't like it. And my auntie Eileen, who passed, she said, "Why don't you go learn from Uncle Max?" And my father had been boarded with Max Sormento, great Grandmaster Max Sormento, which is just Uncle Max or Max, Mono Max, as a teenager or youth, because my grandfather worked in the fields, right? And so he went and learned from Mono Max. Mono Max says, introduced him to his pare, which is great Grandmaster Cabales, and he trained for 10 years privately with both of them in the early 1960s on into the 70s. And during that time, the length of the stick was anywhere from 24 to 30 plus inches in length. For the serrada, the Kunai Mano was taught by Grandmaster Cabales anecdotally. So he would talk about fights that he'd been in and how he won them, and then that was the body of the instruction. And then they would work on skill development, drills, and things like that when there was a flagging of like focus or concentration because they became tired or they're just diffused because of working for so long. And typically, those lessons were all day. Like my father would take my mother. They lived in the Bay Area. This is before I was born, right? And go back to Stockton where I grew up, right? And he would go and learn from them, and my mother would spend time with the family, right? And that connection with my Uncle Danny in Osano is because Ninong Mary, his mother, was the godmother
All right.
of my aunts and uncles and stuff like that. So the family was closely linked. You know, my great grandmother Gregoria actually used to babysit Dan and Uncle Dan.
Okay.
So
Wow.
so we're very close in that way, in the way that, you know, Filipino communities are.
Yeah.
I once read someone say, "He's not even your uncle. How could you even do that?" I'm like, you would want to be part of the Filipino community and Filipino culture, but you would deny me my culture at the same time. That's really interesting, right? How convenient for you, right? But so we had this close relationship, and that's that genesis from going from learning from Manong Angel, Manong Leo, Manong Max to the West Coast Eskrima Society, on to teaching law enforcement, working with a gentleman by the name of Paul Porter in the way that he developed the fighting part of the training, not technical stuff or tactical or techniques, more structure and everything else is kind of the flow of the Inayan system of Eskrima, and it's the way that he built efficacy in the training. Right, that's a lot of the structure that we see in Filipino martial arts coming out of Stockton is by and large influenced by my father, because there was no ranking system or anything like that, and that most of that was developed and designed. In fact, Grandmaster Vincent is still using that structure in terms of the diplomas that my father did and all of those things. So the Inayan system of Eskrima is organized by 3 core arts, which is Sirada, Largo, Mano, which is the Cinco Terra system from Manong Leo Hiron, Grandmaster Emeritus Leo Hiron, to be respectful, right? And then Great Grandmaster Max. And then there's the West Coast Eskrima Society, which brings us the other styles, the Sinawai, the Decordes, the Espada Idaga, Bangkao, Latico, or Yuntok Idaga, which is the whip and dagger material. And then what I call Alcantara now, my father just called shield and sword, or shield and axe, or shield and spear. He also taught a variant of that, which was sword and spear, right? So that's the kind of generally some of the things, not all of the things that we do.
Yeah.
And then from there, you know, the healing arts was very important, the healot and herbology and some other things that gurus, right? So like you couldn't become an instructor, cannot become an instructor still in the United System of Eskrima, as you know, my father, you know, dictated, without an understanding of healing arts and the ability to use flexible weapons, semi-flexible weapons, projectile weapons, mechanically projected weapons, as well as all of the styles, right? So all of those things come together. And I don't teach all of those things to my students, because unless they're going to become a guru, there's no point, right? Because they're some people are there to be social. Some people are there to get social status. Some people are there just to have fun. Some people are there so they can learn how to fight. But I mean, most people are not going to need some of that other information. And it's good to have something for the more senior instructors to become involved with. But beyond that, like each of the styles present a different tactical set of answers, right?
Yeah.
You go to some systems and it's like, I'm going to teach you single stick. Right? And so you learn single stick, and then I'm going to teach you double stick. You learn the same movements with the double stick. Now I'm going to teach you stick and dagger, and I'm going to teach you the same movements with stick and dagger. There'll be variation in movement, some additions, some accommodations for changes in range and biomechanics that are necessary to deploy those tool sets, but it's essentially the same movement groups, right? In the Inayan system of Eskrima, things are dealt with from a strategic point of view, right? Do we use a defang, and how do we use a defang? Is there going to be trapping? We're going to be trapping. Am I going to flank? Am I going to take the center line? Am I going to bite out at the edge and the long range, right? And so each of the styles represents a completely different set of answers to the same problem. Which, you know, my angle is my attack, my angle is my defense. That line is that. In fact, my father would call that, you know, he said fighting Eskrima is creative problem solving. You know, you get the same problem asked to you. How are the answers going to be different, whether it's Kadina Damano, Sirada, Inayan Sirada, or Inayan Largamano, or how is Espada Daga different than Sirada? Are they different? Are they the same? And it depends on which generation you learn from. I mean, I had the fortune of learning from my father every generation from the 1970s all the way until he passed, right? So I got to be involved with that, change. Not all
Mm-hmm.
of his students, a lot of them that actively teach today weren't training with him 3, 4, even 5 years before his passing, right? So they didn't get to see some of those later developments that he did. One could argue that they learned a more pure art, because they learned an older version of that, or one could argue that the later generation is immaterial, right? Immaterial, but
Yeah,
the
yeah,
body of
that's true.
work
Mm.
that he
Mm.
has to
Mm.
contribute in the way that he organized the system, not just the
Yeah.
physical, but also the character development, the the analytical
Mm.
development, the devices that denote achievement, and how that works for bolstering the confidence of the student. All of those things are part of that Inayan system of Eskrima as opposed to Inayan Eskrima, right? That's an
Yeah.
important thing to see and experience and understand, because otherwise you're only getting a piece of it. It's like going
That's
to
true.
a Chinese restaurant and you order the same thing every time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Jitsu schools and systems, over the years that they try not to change the art at all. They're trying to preserve the art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine if you want to be a time capsule, right? However, right, fighting is a breathing, living thing,
It
right?
is.
And
It
if
is.
you look at his body of work and his development, the Inayan system of
Mm-hmm.
Eskrima, you see that in action. You see a logical flow and a progression towards a particular ideal or truth, right?
Yeah.
Which is one of the things he was always looking for, and that's
Yeah.
embodied in the Inayan system of Eskrima. The ranking system, the titling, the progression of when you teach what and why we teach something when. Most people are
Mm.
like, how do I do this, and what is this technique? Very typical questions, very typical answers are given for that. But the when and the
Yeah.
why are much more interesting questions. And those are the questions that he would constantly try to answer. He would try to work through, and he would constantly look at new situations, right? Like I
Yeah.
was required to watch, you know, um, I was required to watch very gruesome and graphic content at a very early age in terms of violence, so that I could understand the thing that I was learning, right? That I
Mm.
could put it in
Mm.
context, because
Yeah.
in a vacuum it means nothing. I mean, you can preserve the
Yep.
art,
Exactly. That's true. That's true.
right? But removing yourself from that, or removing the art from that, and then putting it in a glass is for a museum,
Mm.
right? And art is a
Yeah.
living, breathing experience, right?
Yes.
So that's a very simple answer to the what is an Inayan system of Eskrima.
Okay.
Very like the minutia. Sirada is a closing technique, right? It's a closing art. You're not doing
Mm.
Sirada if you're moving backwards, according,
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
right? Right, and I think with LSAI,
Yeah, it's the same.
it's the same thing, because we have the
Yeah.
same root, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that that's wrong, because we have largo mana, which is to move to the side and move back,
Mm.
right? And if you're not inhibiting movement, if your trapping technique is only just trapping the arm and then hitting the person, which what most people interpret the Cadena de Mano coming from Max Sarmento, right? My
Yeah.
father's teacher, his uncle, right? Then you don't really understand Cadena de Mano. You have the hand drills, great, awesome, right? And everything else. But there is a genius to the way that Manong Max used his body articulation, his steps, to completely inhibit not just the limb that was being overtly trapped,
Yeah.
but you were off position. You couldn't really use any of your other tools, while he was
Yes.
able to maintain at least one tool free. And that's
Yeah.
that genius that you don't get from just learning a peri-peri check. That
Yeah,
is
exactly. That's true.
that is the ingredient. Like, it was like, oh, I know how to make soup. I get some salt, some water, I boil some bones. Here's the ingredients. That's right, you got soup. No, you don't.
No.
You have the ingredients for soup, right? And you don't even know what it tastes yet, right?
That's
So that process that's in my opinion. Now, I'm my father's son, so of course I'm going to revere everything he taught me. But that's his genius, the way that he organized the system, right? The Sinawali has a completely different methodology. He spent his last, I don't know, maybe 7-8 years of teaching, showing his students who loved Sirada how he could use Sinawali to defeat them. And they hated the double stick. Oh, it's not that good. It's just for beginners and all that other stuff. Because I remember I was an intermediate junior instructor at the time, and he was doing that, and he's laughing and stuff. And I'm like, for me, it's a formative experience, because I'm still, open and learning. I'm judging, and I'm like, wow. What is he really teaching me? And he's
Mm.
teaching me that each of the styles within the system should be utilized to test the other styles,
Yeah.
to expose its weakness,
Yeah.
to
Exactly.
build up its strength,
Yeah.
right? That way we come away in the Inayan system. Why would you learn a system, right? So you have composite systems, right? Whether you just learn a little of this and a little of that, or with the way that my father organized it, where you learn all of the Serrada, all of the Largo Mano, all of the Sinawali, all of the Decordas, all of the Cadena de Mano, right?
Mm-hmm.
You, by the time you become a guru in the Inayan system of Eskrima, you're a guru in 5 styles at minimum, right? Depending on
Okay.
when he taught you and whether he taught you some of the other stuff, because he didn't teach everyone everything, right?
Okay.
So, and he taught even like, so between me and my sister's learned different stuff, and I had to get it from her and understand, because he taught, because my sister's a girl and she's smaller than me, right? He did all of that so that way you could learn about yourself through testing yourself about your biases. Some people, they go, I only like single stick. Okay, let me show you how knife works against single stick, he would say, right? Or something to that effect, right? So that's the Inayan system of screen. You could learn the techniques. You come to any one of my seminars, you can buy my DVDs, you can join my member pay site, and you can see all that stuff and you can learn that stuff, right? That's great. And that's great for you to do. And it's fun. And maybe it makes your system, whatever your system is, better.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That's great too, right? But what I just talked about is really what the Inayan system of Eskrima is. It's this living, breathing thing that fits for you, that allows you to approach life's problems, not just fighting, in a way that's creative and a way that is basic. It helps you, right? It builds you up. I mean, Guru is my favorite title of all martial arts. Sensei means the one who knows the way. Stern father, right?
He was
professor, teacher, great, right? Guru means to uplift. That's the Sanskrit meaning of that title, to lift up. And that was one of the things that, you know, my father was very good at, right? Now, no, Master Alvin, my sister only teaches her kids now. So
okay.
He's asking a question.
Yeah.
But so the Inayan system of Eskrima is more than its movements, you know. I one of my father's students that got excommunicated just before he passed away, a guy that's out of France. He was like, "Oh, I already have all the Serrata. I can just, I know it all." Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know all the movements, right? And you certainly can go out and teach seminars and sell that. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But I would never say that in front of Grandmaster Kabbalahs. There's a depth there that takes more than a handful of years to figure out, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not that he's wrong in his assertion that he's learned the art, right? It's wrong that he understands the art, because I am still learning from my father today. Yeah, right? I'll teach something and then I'll remember something he said and go, I wish I had remembered. I wish I had. Just it needed to mature, and it's like that saying, it's like wine, it needed to mature in me, right? And that's part of that process. This is why you couldn't become an instructor so early. I have students that have been with me for 22 years and I still haven't ranked them as master, because they're not ready, right? And it's okay if they don't become master. If they don't want to do that, that's fine too. It's not necessary.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's my answer to that question. What is the Inayan system?
Wow.
Without teaching you a technique.
No,
you can't have one without the other. But it's the part that I can communicate in a podcast is this overall understanding of it being a living, breathing thing to address a particular way of teaching, a way of experiencing, and then going because like I'll teach a technique and go like this, and I'll get hit and I go, no, I'm wrong. Let's try that again. And I want that experience now, right? Because if you're in a fighting art, if your teacher is not getting beat up a little bit in a fighting art, then it's not a fighting art, right? Because you're just doing a traditional art and things. But if you go to any camp, right, everyone gets punched. Everyone.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone's going to get stabbed. Everyone's going to do those things. Everyone, if we're both get to move at the same time and do whatever it is that we want to do, then we're going to take our lift.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I tell my students now, like Patrick, you mentioned, he's on right now, right? I always tell him, I'm like, he's one of my proteges right now, and I'm like, this ain't a sewing circle. This is not a book club. If you want that, then you need to go somewhere else.
Mhm.
Here, you're going to get injured. If you want to go to this level, you're going to have to accept some risk. So, um, those are things that kind of, to me, really characterize my family
Yeah.
system, right? More so than its movement, right? More so than its
Wow. Wow. Yeah, Alvin said it sounds like it's really an extensive curriculum, which I do agree.
linear.
And
It's close to 40 years. Linear. If I teach it linearly, it's 40 years. I spent most of my time after my father passed, because I have my uncle Danny out there teaching history, and my father taught history, and it's only like Jolene's on here, right? She was at a recent
yeah, Jolene
seminar
said yeah.
a year ago, and Edgar too, where I'm like, okay, I need to start talking about history, because it's coming to that point where I'm the mono, because I
Yeah.
wasn't the mono before, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to. I spent most of my time trying to understand how people tick. How do they develop belief?
Mm.
What are the physiological indicators of a learning experience, and how do I utilize that and duplicate that so that I can shorten the amount of time it takes to teach, right? Because if I teach the way that my father started teaching me at the age of 6, right, I won't finish teaching.
Yeah.
Right? There's thousands of techniques in Serato,
That's true.
thousands of techniques in the Inayan de Cortes, thousands of variations in Sinawali, thousands. Like, so now the question is how does Pareto's principle apply to that? How does the law of requisite variety apply to that? Right? How does the law of utilization apply to that? These are all different ideas that come outside of martial arts that I can utilize to quickly communicate what I need. Because the thing is that if someone comes in, like Greg Garcia's on here, he's been training with my family since the 90s, right? If he had to wait till today to be good enough to fight, that's not useful. I mean, he's a master of his own right.
That's true. That's true.
Self-defense and the need for the art on that level doesn't wait until you have the right color belts or
exactly. That's
whatever it is that you wear, whether it's a hat, a t-shirt, your gloves,
100% agree. Yes.
Whatever it is. So that's what I spent most of my time. I've moved away from that research because I think I've achieved what I needed to achieve. I'm able to get a rudimentary reflexive response in college students in less than an academic year. Right? Now, does that mean that they fight an accomplished discriminator? No. They're not going to encounter an accomplished discriminator. I was teaching at Stanford University. They need to worry about getting drugged behind a dumpster and being date raped. That's what one of the most recent.
Yeah, that's true.
They need to worry about those things, right? And so, how do we approach and teach in such a way that I don't need 40 years of linear instruction in order to achieve accomplishment? I don't need 10 years. I should need 5 years. I shouldn't even need a year to make someone accomplished enough to be able to defend against the average assailant, right? How do I know what the average assailant is? I've been in a lot of fights. Right? I tell people usually in public, I don't know how to fight. I've never been in a fight. But honestly, like, if you're working in law enforcement, or if you're working in security, and if you haven't been in a tussle or two, there was a point where I was fighting every weekend. Pushing and shoving matches, knock them out, drag them out, call the police, an ambulance kind of fights. All those different kinds of fights inform this idea that my father had, which was they need to be able to walk away within 2 months and be able to defend themselves. Right? That was his standard that he gave me. I don't know if he said that to everyone, but he's looking at me and he's like, these people need to be able to defend themselves now. And so, like my Uncle Danny will teach the Largo Mano that was taught to the Philippine infantry, the Bolo Brigade. My father would teach the Inayan de Cortes to begin with. And I teach something entirely different, and I teach the three together. So that way, in a 2-week or 3-week period of time, they have rudimentary skill to defend themselves against the average assailant, right? So it's quite a lot of a curriculum, but if you understand how people learn and then understand what you're trying to prepare them for, it's an achievable goal.
Yeah.
But then again, what I'm saying is I'm not trying to preserve the art in the first 3, 4, 5 years. I'm not trying to do that, right? If the person sticks with me longer, then I would be trying to preserve the culture and the art in that person, because now we've gotten past the immediate need of I need to be able to get home. Right? I have a student that got jumped by 3 guys in public transit in San Francisco, and he called me the
Oh.
day after. And he's like, and he hadn't been training with me. Right? His name's Matt, Matt Oliver, and he's like, I just have to thank you. I went home. You guys grabbed me and mobbed me, and I think they pulled his hoodie over his head or something. There's something where he was just,
okay.
but he was able to. He took his licks, but he was able to do that. That's my concern first, before whether or not you know how to do the salute or even know the name of the art or any of those things, because you don't want your student walking away thinking they can defend themselves because they know some punching combinations and they know how to do a couple kicks, right? That's not adequate in terms of self-defense, right? Not when you're sitting in front of a rape victim and trying to teach them self-defense, right? That is not an adequate response, right? So,
okay. We got a comment here from start. I'm gonna read first from Robbie. Thank you, Suro, for telling me I was holding my breath while doing a technique in that one session I had with you 3 years back. Yeah. And Hyle said, it's a common thing to students to hold their breath when they do stuff, even in dancing.
Well, it has to do with the way that you process information, right? So you're subvocalizing, right? And so what happens is, and you watch it in children, right? So when they're drawing, they'll hold their breath, they'll stick their tongue out, or they'll bite their lip or something like that. So there's this process when they're cognating, right? And if you understand that, you can address it in the way that you teach. To the point of, in the Inayan system of Eskrima, as I teach it, the first skill I teach is breath, right? And it's very simple. I don't teach a special way of breathing. I just want you to be conscious of your breathing. Yeah. Right? Because breath it's the rule of two. If you've ever done survival, sometimes it's considered the rule of two, sometimes it's the rule of three. It's like 2 minutes without air, right? 2 days without water, right? 2 weeks without shelter, right? 2 months without food, right? Something along those lines, right? And I might have those numbers wrong, but like that applying that to your martial arts, Robbie, is why I can do that. And some of my students have commented that, like, I can tell when they're not breathing, even though it's loud, because I can feel it in my students now, because I'm so aware of it. And I don't know if it's some kind of subconscious thing where I'm noticing respiration cues, but now I can pretty much, I'm telling someone, I'm like, you're not breathing. And they're like, how can you tell? I'm like, are you breathing? No. I'm like, you breathe. Who cares how I can tell? You're not breathing.
You're not breathing.
That's the more important thing, right? So, yeah, you're welcome, Robbie. Hopefully you've gotten better breath control.
Right. Hyle said, Jason is a great teacher. Those that get to really absorb from him in privates seem to get amazing access to his teaching skill. He presents great energy and makes you think whenever he is in front of you. That is really good. A mark of a good teacher. If you can make your students think and then also like help them discover the answer, or understand basically the problem in front of them.
Yeah, so we teach like 5 paths of learning, right? So go ahead and go, Greg's, and I'll go back to the paths of learning if you want to go to that comment.
All right, okay, so 100% agree. Every time I leave private from Suro, I feel like I have a year's worth of homework, because so much of what we cover connects everything else that I do.
So I'll comment to two of those things first, right? So the first one is, so there's 5 paths of learning that we teach, right? And so the first one is observation, right? So I'm telling students, use your eyes. You shouldn't have to be instructed. You're only going to be able to have your power of observation when you're fighting an opponent, right? So that's the first one. The one that people want is the path of instruction. That's a source, whether it's YouTube, a video, a direct instruction, showing you a trick that they learned in a street fight, whatever it is, right? The one that's really important, though, the two that are really important is, or 3, I should say, emergency. That's like when whatever you thought you knew doesn't work and you have to figure something out. That gives us empirical knowledge, right? And no matter how bad that technique is from the teacher's point of view, I will never remove that experience from that person. They're like, I don't care what you said. That works, right? And then there's the path of discovery and the path of exploration. Now,
Yeah.
discovery is very rare, but if you discover something of your own, even if it already existed, it doesn't change your internal or personal experience. And as a good instructor, I should encourage my students to discover and explore along with the observation, along with direct instruction, and along with creating emergency moments for them, a context for them to train. Because a lot of times
Of
teaching isn't
course.
about, move your hand this way and step this way, and Robbie, make sure that you breathe. It's not just those. It's also creating context and environment where they can explore and experience without having to go to the hospital if they make a mistake, right?
Yeah, that's
Without
true.
use a limb with making a mistake, that it's relevant, and then we should test it. All right, well, okay, let's try to test it. Let me hit you harder. Let me hit you faster. Let me do it in surprise.
Yeah,
Let's turn off the
let's
lights.
see.
Let's splash
Yeah.
some water in your face and then do it, right? Do all those things. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to spin around in a circle and now do the technique, right? All of those things will help develop them in that path of learning, right?
Yeah.
And something
Yeah.
that great call to, like when my sister graduated high school with most improved student. I think it was the accolade that she got. And I was responsible for teaching her from advanced student to instructor, junior instructor, right? That was part of my thing. And again, one of the things that my father wanted is to make sure that his students could actually produce other instructors, right? And I'm one of the few students that actually did that from ground up on a number of people before my father even passed. They were only students, right? My sister, obviously not my only student, but there's a number of them, like Justin Meyer, that made it all the way to instructor, by developing them. And one of the things I said to her is that, what you really need to understand is that if you look at a technique or you look at a movement or you look at your opponent's movement, that all of these things are connected. There isn't any moment where we're not connected. Even if there's space between us, we're still connected. The movements, the techniques, the knowledge is connected. And as we move, so must everything else respond, right? I didn't express it that way because, I was 24 at the time when I expressed this idea. And she took that and she put that in her speech when she accepted her award for most improved student. And she, I used the metaphor of a web, right? And I said that, at the center of the web is truth, right? And that each line leading to the center is a pathway to the truth. And each circle is a set of biases, a set of ideas, a set of, whether it's a Taekwondo, or it's Krav Maga, or if it's Aikido, and we'll see that they intersect and they all lead to truth. And once we start to understand that in a visceral way, it's much easier for us to decipher the rest of the and art, or our art in particular, right? And that's something that my father taught me. I'm somewhat better at articulating because I took public speech and debate when I was in high school, and I competed and I was terrible, but I learned a lot, right? And he was able to kind of give me that idea, and then I was able to apply the metaphor, so that way it was easier to communicate to others, right? So those are the things that make it so that the teacher, because like anybody can teach you how to hit. I can inspire you to hit me. I just need to run my mouth enough until I hit the right note. Talk about your mom or your wife or something like. Eventually, you're going to hit me, and if I do it long enough without doing anything else other than defending, you will evolve your offense past my defense, right? And then anybody can teach anybody to defend, right? I just need to inspire you through fear for your own safety to want to do something to prevent me from trying to attack you in some way. So it's not really an interesting methodology of teaching overall if we're trying to develop a human being from someone who's not confident, not necessarily inclined to violence, not necessarily a high pain tolerance, right? Not necessarily confrontational. If we're taking the lowest common denominator, the person that needs to be able to defend themselves most, the meek, right? If that is the case, then we need to have a pathway of teaching that's not only like, I'm going to hit you with the one. And there's a number of videos online where I'm banging on my students as hard as I can. So don't think that I just talk when I teach, right? But I have to connect those two things together, right? Because if I don't, and you don't make meaning of your experience, you don't walk away with the learning experience.
Of course.
You walk away with a harrowing experience, something tantamount to hazing, right? But you don't have a transformative experience, which is what teaching is, right? If you're a master instructor like Alvin Obama, if you're a master instructor like Master Ron Saturno, right? Your job, my job, your job is to take someone and make them someone else. their
That's true.
better self, or a kind of better
Mhm.
self, if you will, right?
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
requires talking, even though I've been told by my girlfriend that I talk too much when I teach, but that's beside the point. So,
Yeah, it's that has been that is actually nice, especially that you're bringing out all these things that we as teachers basically have to consider as well, especially that we're teaching. We're not just teaching skills, we're not just teaching art, but we're basically trying to develop people as well,
mhm.
in to become the better versions of themselves. So
And
it's
they
really
give
important.
themselves their first lesson. I
Yeah,
have a new student that just started, right? I said, the first challenge for you is to make it to the parking lot, get out of your car, and come into the school. That's going to be your first challenge, because
yeah,
that's you saying, I don't know, and I need to know, right? And for
yeah.
some people, you never even make that challenge. I've
Mm,
talked to people that, yeah, I went to the school and I checked it out, but, I just decided not to in some way, for whatever reason, right? And it's not a bad reason.
hmm.
It's just there, right? And it's a challenge for people. I'm afraid every time I get in a fight, right? Every
Yeah,
time that I would go to do an arrest, every time that, there was a confrontation, there's a little bit of that adrenaline, there's a little bit of that fear. And that's the
always.
stuff that keeps me, that's to ensure that I'm alive, that's
Yeah,
sure that
that's
I
true.
stay alive, right?
That's
They
true.
don't- Most people don't know how to respond to that signaling with their
Mm,
physiology, right? And that's part of teaching martial arts,
mm,
is to show them that that is not a breaking moment, that's a tempering moment, right?
yeah.
Right. And like, sometimes I see it's glossed over. You see a lot of the more typical commercialized schools. There's nothing wrong with the schools. They do a lot for the community, right? But sometimes that's missing. They miss
That's
this understanding.
yeah.
Because it's easy. It's easy for me to forget the first time because I forget the first time I ever had a lesson, right? It's easy to forget that, right?
Yeah,
So but
yeah.
it's important that we understand and we can empathize with the student what that
That's true.
process is like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Keeps us fresh, right?
Okay. Alvin said, "Yeah, tell my students we're also training our spirit," which is, yeah. This is also one of the things that I find really interesting with the Inayan system, because you mentioned earlier. Okay, yeah. Besides training the spirit, uh, your one of the things that basically you also sort of like require, or part of the requirement of becoming an instructor, is knowing stuff about the healing arts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very rare that you get these now as part of a sort of like requirement to become instructors. For a lot of in a lot of groups in the industry today, it's just about learning the skill. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just basically very very limited type of skills, type of competency. But your approach is, I would say, more holistic.
Yeah, I mean, my father really believed. I mean, my father was very enamored with the idea of the warrior ethos and the warrior class, right? And he was very enamored with the traditions of the old masters from the Philippines.
Mm,
That they could do the hilot, they could do, they could
yeah.
fight. Could fight in a number of different ways using a number of different tools against many or only one opponent, right? And he also, at least for me, really kind of pushed forward this idea of like what I tell some of my like Patrick is one of the few students that probably has heard this in the most recent, right? He and Cole are my two like main masterclass students. They do private lessons with me 4 to 6 days a week, right? Plus they travel with me to teach and stuff, right? But I told them the first fight is to fight with yourself.
Mm,
You got to decide that you're going to go. You got to decide that you can do it. We have these
yeah.
discussions where there are days that you don't want to come to class, but when you come to class, are there days that you regret coming to training? Right. And I just
Mm,
talked to one of my lesson students today. And I'm like, do you ever regret actually coming to a lesson? No, you don't. But there are times when you don't want to come. And that's okay
yeah.
too, right? As long as you
Hmm.
overcome those things. And the second fight is the fight between you and the teacher. Your ability to abase your ego in order to accept knowledge, good, bad, or indifferent, and you know refrain from judgment and refrain from, any kind of analysis till the process is over, or at least for the day, right? And then come to the next day. And the last fight, people think is against their opponent. No, it's a fight with yourself in front of your opponent.
Exactly.
Right? And that's that spirit that Master Alvin's talking about, right? Like that's the hard one, right? The others are really hard, but this one is difficult because this is like, I don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to be okay? I don't want to hurt this person. I don't want to be a person violent.
You've got those dilemmas to face.
It's a transformative experience when you get in a real fight, right? Am I going to be the monster that I'm afraid I am? Some people
that's true.
That's true. And that has to be addressed in your training at some point. At some point, it needs to be addressed. And the thing is that it's like any other object that needs maintenance, right? It must be maintained because that particular mindset, that quality of spirit, takes a long time for you to cultivate, and then it must continue to be sharpened. It must be honed because it's very easy for you to lose that switch. Right? Very easy for you to go from a man or a woman who's capable and comfortable in very dire situations to one who's more inclined to be peaceful. Now, I don't think that you should be violent, but at the same time, you're not peaceful if you can't choose violence. You're not. You're a victim who's trying to.
You're a victim. Yes, exactly.
Others with some kind of projected morality that you shouldn't do this. You can't tell Russia you shouldn't. It doesn't work that way. We're seeing this today, right? You have to be a peaceful country that is capable of violence. That's the whole mutual destruction and threat deterrence and all that stuff. And that's the same in personal combat. And we learn this if anybody reads Gorin no Sho in the Book of Five Rings, they talk about this idea. They talk about this idea in Ping Sun Tzu's Art of War, right? They talk about these ideas already, right? It's just that you get to actually dig your hands deep into that and get a feel for it and wear that as a martial artist. If you're training in a traditional, that would include the healing arts, that would include all the other things that are implied by learning healing arts, and how that works with your martial art, how that works with, because what is martial arts, right? Martial arts is the art of war, right? Martial arts is the ancient military secrets of long dead civilizations that still is applicable today. Right? That is what martial arts. That's different than martial sport, right? That's different than your average sport is very disconnected from its traditions of its origin, right? Like, most people that I know that do taekwondo don't know that it comes from Shotokan. That General Cho or whatever his name was actually a Japanese military educated general, right? And learned Shotokan in the military. I don't know if it was Naval Academy or something like that, right? Right? That's the thing that they miss. And that's why my father wanted the healing arts and how he was so enamored with the ethos of the warrior and its acts and its, its codes, whether it be the code of the Bushido, the knightly code, or our Inayan code of conduct, right? That's why he put that in there, because it wasn't enough to make a weapon out of a human being. You have to make a whole human being that would be exemplary for the warrior class is what he was shooting for.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So it's really nice, and almost like refreshing actually, because it's very rare. As I've said, it's very rare that people will actually go to the length of making sure that you get to be developed as a whole person in a particular martial arts system. Sometimes all they think is, okay, this is a martial arts system, or this is a fighting system. All we need to do is train for combat or train for fighting. They don't give that much emphasis on the psychological aspect, on the emotional aspect, on the mental aspect, and the spiritual aspect of the person as well. So
the approach that those schools make is like, I'm trying to make you into a weapon. I'm making myself into a weapon, or whatever it is, right? In fact, the shirt I'm wearing says I'm the weapon on the back of it, right? This idea, right? Weapons break. Souls don't.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? Minds don't, unless you let them break, right? Weapons, your body will break. We all know this as we get older, right?
Yeah.
But the internal part of it is what drives you. That gives you the determination to, like, I just finished a half marathon in Southern California, right? I was limping practically by the end of the last 2 miles, right? But I finished. Didn't finish with a great time,
Mm.
but I wanted to know the limit of my body. And then I wanted
Yeah.
to know if my mind and my spirit could push me further,
Mm.
right? And that's because I have like some certain issues with my gait and things like that, but the pain isn't any different, right? Like I couldn't straighten my
Mm.
leg out completely, right? So, and I did that when I did the Tough Mudder in 2018 in up in the Tahoe Mountains, right? So it's that process and figuring that out and having that fortitude, because the thing is there's going to come a time in a,
Yeah.
if you get in a prolonged fight where you're fighting, and competitive fighters know this better than the traditional martial artists, because they have to go the
Mm-hmm.
3, the 4, the 10, or however many rounds it is, right? And towards that end, you watch those championship rounds in the UFC, and it's that last round, the 5th round, 5 more minutes, and these guys, the only thing that they're fighting with is their heart,
Yeah,
and you can't teach heart,
that's
right?
true. That's
I
true.
don't agree with
That's true.
that assertion, but that is what we're talking about, and how we address that in the Nine System of Eskrima is through the healing arts and some of the other things, and then how my uncle Danny tries to achieve that is just pointing us at that 12th area of Kali, the idea of
The
spiritualism,
spiritual system.
religion,
Yeah.
or faith, right? Of love. And love of a fellow man, right, as well as someone that you love as a partner, right, and
Mm-hmm.
how that fuels you, right? Because it's different when you're fighting for yourself. A lot of people, they'll let a lot of things happen to them, but you threaten that one special person or those special people, their children or their wife or their spouse, whatever it is, their partner, right? Then you awaken that spirit, right? And that has to be cultivated, and it has to be addressed at some point. Otherwise, it's just, I'm going to run 5 miles, I'm going to get my black belt, and I can do a bunch of, or like I did, my test, and I've punched a lot, and I've kicked a lot, and I've done stuff, and they beat up on me a lot, and I've done all these things, but I don't have a reason for it. I haven't changed my,
Yeah. Mm.
because we talk about as teachers changing the identity of the
Yes.
student through the process, because it's just their personal transformation, their own thing, and you don't have full control of that because they're their own
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. That's
But
true.
then it's also their purpose. Who are they serving? Are they
Yeah.
serving themselves in
Yeah.
terms of believing in themselves and making themselves better, which is mostly identity? Or are they doing this so that they can stand in front of harm's way when it comes to their family, right? Or comes to
Mm-hmm.
their country or whatever it is, right? So
Mm.
so that's where the old styles really shine. They really shine on that level, right? Where you
Yeah.
go to a typical combat sports place and they're spitting on the mat, right? Showing no respect for their home,
No,
right?
yeah.
Right? Which is, I mean, they're tough fighters. I wouldn't want to fight them. It's not what I'm trying to do, pick a fight. I'm not impugning their ability, but there's a certain modicum of behavior and etiquette. You should have fun. You should be able to make jokes. You should be able to, get picked on as well as pick on others too, right?
Yeah.
Still maintain a level of respect, and that's part of that warrior ethos. That's why, like
Yeah.
I mentioned, honor, respect, ethic, loyalty, discipline, rule, conduct, these things are core beliefs that my father, or values that my father tried to instill, not all entirely successfully with the students, but it was the thing that he was trying to achieve with each of his students,
Yeah.
certainly.
Okay. Wow. That's yeah. That is really deep at one point. So when it comes to like teaching and everything, and yeah, I do have a lot of respect for your father, your system, and you yourself managing to still like carry on that kind of sort of code or ethos when it comes to teaching, which
Mhm.
is, as I've said, it's sometimes it's very rare now in the industry today. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem of it being an industry instead of a culture, right? You know, um, the ethos used to be inseparable. I mean, if you look at the history of martial arts in America as an example, right? Because that's where all of my knowledge comes from, right?
Yeah.
Born here, grew up here. I mean, I've been all over, been in other countries and stuff, and taught there. But my basis of my experience and understanding comes from being here in the U.S., right? In the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, martial arts is an art for adults. It's an activity for adults, That's what it is, right? And it's not until the 70s, 80s, 90s where we start to see this change in the martial arts industry here in the United States, at the very least, where we see it change towards children. It becomes a children's activity to the point now you go to any particular dinner party and say, oh, yeah, I got a black belt when I was 8, right? Great. That's awesome, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, there were some things that were lost, right? What Krav Maga brought back in the 90s to the martial arts community was the old era of the 1970s, 80s, heavy conditioning, hitting hard, getting hit hard, right? And the efficacy of those arts. This is the time of Chuck Norris. This is the time of this is the time of my father and my father's teachers, right? Your teachers. This is that time.
Right? Yeah, that time, yes.
And what happened is Krav Maga made martial arts an adult thing, right? What made martial arts kind of like almost a masculine thing, not toxic masculinity. It was just an activity that you could do boxing, you could do judo, you could do wrestling, you could do karate, right? And that was a result of World War II, right? That's those military servicemen coming back.
Exactly. Yeah, right? That's true.
It's not that we didn't have fighting in the United States. At the time, you had boxing, you had wrestling, you had all these other things. Can wrestling was in the United States during that time, right? But it wasn't a prevalent thing. It didn't come with the culture, the Eastern culture, any of those things. And then what BJJ brought in the late 90s, early 2000s, speaking to your question, Carl, is sparring and becoming a regular thing, right, in the training, right, becoming the thing that you do. Now, I don't agree with 45 minutes of training and 15 minutes of technique. That's why you have a lot of a lot of attrition in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools and things like that, which is their choice. That's fine, right? But at the same time, that means that the people that most need to be able to defend themselves are the ones that quit the soonest, right? Because they're not able to be crushed by a blue belt or a purple belt or they're a white belt and getting tapped every day and go through that. That's maybe you get some people the diamonds rough, but the people that are getting those old sayings of getting the sand kicked in your face because of the bully, those are the people that are not going to stay because they're just getting bullied inside class, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you want that element there, and so those are things that we're missing. Carl's asking if sparring is important. Sparring and the need for fighting in the United System of Eskrima is compulsory to become an instructor. You cannot become an instructor in the Nine System of Eskrima if you've not had a handful of fights, full contact, just a regular helmet, light or medium hand padding, and then under my father, everything else was optional, and it was inappropriately in today's time, but like if you wore a cup, if you wore elbow pads, forearm pads, if you wore a chest protector, anything other than your hands and your face, like maybe you should block was the attitude, right? So maybe you should just be better at blocking instead of like doing all that stuff, right? And in fact, I was running my own tournaments for a while, and one of the coaches for one of the teams, she goes, "I get it." Because I basically would run my tournaments that way, right? And she would be like, "I get it. My students need to learn how to block." Right? She says this to me. But they're going to quit the tournament if we don't let them wear some more padding or add padded sticks or do something because they're getting hurt too much. And I'm like, well, I'm not here to make it a hazing moment or anything like that. That's what we require for our gurus. That's not what we require for practitioners. So I relented, right? Because I'm not trying to make students better. Not the purpose, right? It's to give the students of the FMA community in my area an experience, right?
Yeah.
That they can take back to their training and hopefully let that inform how they should train or what they should train or maybe what they need to address and what works, right?
Yeah.
That's when you're sparring, whether it be flow, sombrata, whether it be our lock and block reflex training, all the other different, because we have a whole battery of reflexive training in the Inayan System of Eskrima and environmental training that we go through. That's another element besides the physical techniques and stuff, right? That whole part is necessary in order for you to be an accomplished escrimador. There's a difference between practitioner of Filipino martial arts and being an escrimador. And that's told by my father. Tell me stories like he watched a fight, and then this old mono comes out and goes, "Okay, escrimador, you can stop fighting." There's two honorifics beyond our titles and things. Is when my father would call you an escrimador, or when he'd be sparring you and he'd be going, "Oh, artiste," right? Because you do something beautiful in the fight or in the sparring match, right? So, but those things will come out with, you know, lots of training,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
lots of pressure testing, and that pressure testing is to help to build a resolve, a certain aplomb or calm under pressure,
yeah, yeah.
not
That's true.
not the you know aggressive, like I'm the adrenaline and all of that stuff, and right, that's a part of the process. But if you're stopping there, then you've missed the point, right? Not
You
when it
missed
comes
the
to a
point.
sword,
Yes, exactly.
right? Because with a sword, you can't take a hit like you can with a punch or a kick. Can't, right? That could be the end of it. Right? So,
Yeah.
anyways, I lost track of what we were talking about when I wanted to answer.
No, that was good. Hey, you managed to segue it really well. So yeah, so okay, yeah. I was reading like through the bio that you sent me that, and Carl also have address it anyway regarding the importance of sparring. And you mentioned that you basically go through like a progressive like way of like pressure testing
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like different ways of sparring your students to be able to basically uh, develop them well. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so
We have
um,
targeted error rates and things. Yeah.
okay, so do you do like, for example, like some of your sparring sessions? Do you do it outside as well, outdoors, different conditions like low lights, um, like different terrains or uneven terrains as well? Do you expose your
So,
student to those types of?
so lighting needs to be addressed both in terms of condition and as a feature to win the fight, right?
Mhm.
Like I mentioned, my one of my senior instructors, Lahunkuru Justin, I used to carry a tactical light in my mouth, and I would attack him while I was flashing him because I didn't have a helmet or anything like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
so he's having to deal with being blind and then still having to be able to defend himself, right? Because when I was working security, I would often use my tack light to blind the person before I kicked them out of
Yeah.
the venue, right? Because it was
Yeah.
it's harder for them to hit
It's easier.
if they can't see, right? So, you know, so we do address those things, not as much as I'd like to, given, you know, especially with the last 2 years with COVID, it's been very difficult to do that.
Mm.
But during that time, I taught exclusively outside, right? Now I have an indoor location, I teach indoor, but like you can't make an instructor in the system without, like, you know, different environmental pressuring, you know, like uneven
Okay.
terrain, high ground, low ground, also ground where you're both on a slope but facing across the slope as opposed to from a high or low ground, right?
Okay. All
Multiple
right.
component stuff. I, I find stairwells to be harder to fight in than hills, right? Because you can trip, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Doing stuff on slippery surfaces we've done on occasion, right? We discuss things and work with things with regards to confined locations, like working in a door frame, right, or
Mm-hmm.
working in a bathroom stall. I used to do scenario training with my kids long ago, where I'd make them do self defense
Self
techniques
defense.
inside the bathroom, right? So they'd have to figure out like how to not get smashed into the sink and how to do all these things. We would
Yeah.
do a little bit. So I don't have the trust of my current children's students yet because I've only been teaching them for a year, or the families yet to really address that problem. But it is a problem that I want to address. I mean, some of the worst fights that I broke up in bars were inside bathrooms. It's a terrible place to be
Mm.
in a fight, right? It's
Oh
gross
yeah.
and
It
right?
is.
It's who knows what's on the ground, right? You know, if it's 2 a.m. in the morning and you're trying to kick people out and they're throwing a fight and it's a girl and a guy in the men's bathroom fighting, like that's like a whole different kind of problem, right? So we try to address those things in our training because those are real life experiences that are relatable. And you know,
Mm-hmm.
if you haven't seen it yourself or been in it yourself, which is less
Mm-hmm.
likely, right? You probably have heard of it. You were probably
Mm-hmm.
walking by that bathroom once or talked to a friend who's seen that, right? So it's a relatable, real experience, just like real sword fighting happens today, right? We had,
Yeah.
what, 2 years ago or something like that, we had a sword on sword machete fight in the New York subways during COVID or
Oh.
just before COVID. Yeah. So, like, you know, we want to relate those experiences to our training. Otherwise, we're just in a martial dance, right?
Mm.
So
That's true.
in addition to that, we're looking for error rates, right? So that's this incremental progression. We want to be able to progress through the stress in a slope or incline that is constantly pressuring and
Mm.
challenging the student, where I'm also mitigating risk,
Yeah.
right? I use the metaphor of drowning. If I was a
Okay.
swim instructor, right, I'm not going to take your child and throw your child into the center of the deep end of the pool.
That used to be a teaching style. That used to be one.
That's in the Philippines. That was a teaching style as far as teaching how to fight. Okay,
I
you fight. You hit me, I show you. Right, right.
yeah, exactly.
I'm not a stranger to that experience myself. But right, that doesn't necessarily inculcate the kind of behaviors I want from my student. Right, as far as like
Yeah, that's
building
true.
them up, lifting. Right. So what I'm looking for is a way to have them have risk, but not risk going
Hmm.
to the hospital. Right. And I'm not
Yeah.
always successful with that. I've had students be like, don't do this thing otherwise, and I'll take 2 steps away. I'm like, all right, someone call 911. Right. It's that happens still sometimes. Right. Less so in the last 10 years than it's happened before. I remember teaching finger locking sequence resistant
Oh, okay.
reversals and stuff at a seminar in the Midwest. I said, okay, we're going to do this. And so then here's the thumb lock, and here, lock the index finger and lock this finger. And then I said, be careful, go slow, because it's easy to break fingers when you're doing this exercise. And I took
Mm.
2 steps away, and I heard pop, ow. And then, and then it's like, let's get a finger split on this guy and do all those things. Right. So, you have to have that risk, Carl, as far as all the way to
Yeah.
fighting, but
Mm.
you don't have to do it right away. My first
Yeah.
job is to teach you not to drown. Then we can
Yeah.
teach you to
That's
find the
true.
edge of the pool, right? Then we can teach you how to swim cross back and forth and not need the edge of the pool, right? We can do those things through that process of training. And so when you ask about like the pressure testing, yes, the pressure's got to be on uneven terrain, loose footing. I myself, most of my intermediate to advanced training was on loose footing, like 90%
Mm.
of it, because we trained on basically a driveway that was old asphalt with gravel over it. So it was slippery, right? You couldn't take big, deep stances because you'd slip out, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the rest of the training was in a plowed field where my foot would drop 6 inches to 18 inches into the soil before I'd hit terra firma. And then now I got to figure out how to do my footwork in that while my teacher's attacking me, right? So, those things are still things that I
Right.
effort to preserve those processes, because the United System of Eskrima is not just a body of techniques; it's experience, a set of
Yeah.
traditions. It's a process, and it's a way of approaching and thinking
It's
about conflict, not just physical conflict, but
yeah.
most concretely physical conflict.
It's yeah.
Right? In order to do that, it's not a sewing circle, and it's not a book club. At some point, I'm going to have to hit you as hard as I can, as fast as I can, and sometimes as often as I can, so you can do the thing that you need to do, that you can prove to
Hmm.
yourself that you can do that. Because it doesn't
Yeah.
matter to me whether you can defend yourself. It matters to you as the
Mm.
practitioner,
Yeah.
right? So that's how we design the system. And so right now we've begun to call this particular process and all the things that we're talking about in a very general way, we call it the cipher, right? Because it's this
Okay.
thing that father would use to unlock the code of what it means to be, an accomplished discriminator. So we call it this. Right?
Mm.
This is a new thing that
Okay.
we're doing right now. Just like
All
this
right.
is we figure this out, right? And
Yeah.
so it's successful to a degree, at least. It's hard to say because I still have many students to teach yet. So.
Okay. Yeah. We call it evolution in our practice. So basically, by undergoing through those like stress tests and everything in a progressive way, it allows you to evolve into becoming a better person or becoming better from who you were. So
Mhm.
that's just basically how we call it evolution. So when we say like, okay, it's evolution time, so it's like stress test, but it's not just about basically submitting yourself into some sort of a stressful situation, but it's allowing you to understand your reactions, your emotions, and how you process information, and try to like act on it as quickly as you can.
Mhm.
So, but it's that cipher. Cipher is nice. Oh, Tuhon Bob is here as well.
Yeah. Hello, Tuan.
Okay, so um, we have basically like talked about like your system, your journey, and everything, and you have already alluded earlier on that you became like a bounty hunter. I call it a bounty hunter. So I mean, for those who are basically who may be interested, how you got into it, what inspired you, or yeah, just basically
My
how you got into
girlfriend at
it.
the time. My girlfriend at the time wanted me to make more money, and I was trying to figure out what I could do with my skill set that I understood and my most recent work experience, and still be able to teach. Right? Because
Mm-hmm.
certain jobs, just I wouldn't be able to teach. Like a lot of people ask me after, like, why didn't you become a police officer? I said because that schedule sucks. That's why.
Mm.
You can make more money, right? The benefits are significantly better. I'm doing very much the same job, but I also don't have my nights, which is when most people take martial arts lessons, right? So I was
Mm.
trying to
Yeah.
balance providing a nice living arrangement for my girlfriend, is a Russian lady by the name of Yana at the time, and then also be able to continue to pursue teaching and training. About that time in 2013 is when I started training more regularly with my uncle Dan. When I went to one of his seminars in Stockton, I said, because my dad used to bring my uncle Danny and Aunt Paula to teach, seminars, and so I've been learning intermittently from them since I was a little kid. And it's good to have a teacher. It's good to
Mm.
abase yourself to someone else and go, okay, well, I'm going to reserve my judgment, and I'm just going to try to absorb what you give me, and not compare it to what I already know or what I think I know, right? So just to keep me fresh and to work that, right? So some conversations that happened where he asserted that I would do well. He didn't put it that way, but I said, I don't know. I mean, I don't know everything, right? So uh, I was trying to balance all things. So what's going to give me the opportunity to go to LA, which is 6 hour drive, right? And for the first
Mm-hmm.
year, I did like over 170 hours with him in the first year
Okay.
through seminars, and I would drive because I worked 410s, right? So I'd work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And so what I would do is on occasion, because I did 410s, on occasion with where I was working for the company I was working, I could leave. I could just say, hey, I'm going to take this next Thursday off. And they're like, that's fine. You just work a Friday
Yeah.
when you come back or something like that, right? So I would drive down there and train. So I was trying to find a job. And this job, which I started really trying to figure out how to get to it, started in 2013. And it was tough. It was a really tough experience because like the certifications are easy.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like you go get your classes, you get your background checked by the DOD and the DOJ and local sheriff's department. Make sure you're not a criminal and all that stuff. You take your PC 832, which is a class for laws of arrest here in California, and then you also get your licensing for bail to become a
Yeah.
fugitive retrieval agent. With all of those pieces, then if you have what's called a bail piece or the documentation, which is your case that you're looking for, then you're under the color of law to arrest people that are basically running, right? Referred to a lot of times as skips. So
Mm-hmm.
I got this job by networking, right? Like I knew a
All
guy
right.
who
Okay.
knew a guy, so they would call me up and hey, it's I'm going to need you at 10 o'clock tonight, and this happens for about 2 years where like it was like I was teaching at a children's gym, teaching martial arts, working bar security, and then every once in a while they would call me up and say I need you in Salinas, or I need you in Oakland, or I need you there, and I would do that. And eventually I called a guy that I'd been working with. I'm like, hey man, I'm still looking for regular work. He's like, you need to come into this place, bring send me your resume. And so I interviewed, they were really concerned with a hot-headed person. They didn't want a
Okay.
cowboy,
Of course.
someone
Yeah.
who's going to just, go guns
It
blazing
becomes
and
a
all that stuff. And so
liability.
yeah, the first cases, I wasn't even allowed to be armed. So I'm out there with
Okay.
people that are really armed, and I'm not armed at all. Well, I have a knife,
All
but
right.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
so it was that kind of experience. And like, and I'm a pretty quiet person when I'm not teaching, right? My
Mm-hmm.
personality is much more subdued.
Mm-hmm.
So, like a lot of my partners thought I was very chill, right?
Yeah.
And I told my supervisor, look, I'm not risk averse. I'm not risk prone. I'm not, I'm not going to be taking unnecessary risks, but I'm not afraid of going out there and doing stuff if that's what, it requires, because I'm here to do a job.
Mm-hmm.
And, slowly I got to the point where I got a caseload. I was closing a lot of cases. I was probably involved in 5 years full time, 4.5, 5 years full time. I was probably involved in over 200 arrests, everything from child
Wow.
molesters and drug dealers, gang members, cartel members, all that kind of stuff. Like just dealing with all that stuff. I had a chance to work in the field with the U.S. Marshals just by chance, because we were investigating in the same area, right? So it was a really, really good experience, and it was very tragic to see like the conditions that American people live in, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the homeless, right? Which is like one of the things I care the most about, today, right? And just like the things that people do. I remember I arrested a young lady that was the same age as my daughter at the time, and I'm
Okay.
looking at this young girl. She's like 19. She looks like she's 40. Is addicted to her,
Oh.
and it was just like it was a tough thing. So I got into it thinking, I have skill set, and maybe I can make money doing this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just did it. It was just a thing that I did, and then I got out of it because it became to be, I got injured. I sprained my hip in
Okay.
2018 to 2009, the end of,
Mm-hmm.
no, it was 2018. I sprained my hip arresting a methamphetamine addict, and
Wow.
that made it difficult to continue to be in the field.
Yeah.
I was in
Yeah.
the field about a month after that injury and re-injured it again, and then eventually, had to deal with the medical repercussions of that,
Mm.
and then eventually got out of it, and then went into uh, um, law enforcement called um, job called code enforcement, which is
Okay.
health and safety enforcement in communities. And I worked
Mm-hmm.
for cities doing investigations because mostly because I had developed a skill set to write reports, right?
All
Specific
right. Okay.
investigations by evidence, right? And then I was pretty successful with that. And then COVID hit, and then I was out of it
Mm.
because it was I was basically a first responder in the sense of dealing with COVID, and I was enforcing
COVID. Yeah.
shelter orders and things like that, and became a little bit too much. And then the cities couldn't afford to keep people employed because their revenue was down, because they weren't getting
Mm.
the tourism that they would normally get. They weren't getting the taxes because businesses were shut down and everything was
Yeah.
going down.
Yeah.
And so I got back into what I do now, which is tech work. I work as a technical recruiter again. So
Okay. So yeah, of course, one thing interesting there is that line of work allowed you to stay grounded with what
mm-hmm.
you teach and what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it allows you to keep your mindset in the correct, I would say, in the correct path, even when you teach students. So you'll be able to tell students which ones is like myth, which one is
Mm-hmm.
practical, okay, which one is
Mm-hmm.
real, which one is Hollywood, so to speak. So at
It,
least,
it,
yeah,
it
you
certainly
manage to give that
gives
perspective. Yeah.
you it certainly gives you the ability to discern, from your experience, to discern where we could go wrong, right? Like
Yeah.
my personal perspective after interacting with people that have been doing it for 15 years, working with law enforcement, sheriff, and police on different investigations as well, because you have to interface with them and announce
Mm-hmm.
your presence and things like that, so that they know that there's this person with a badge and a gun. He's in your jurisdiction. Why is he, and who is he? Because he's not a police officer in your agency or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Working with them and talking with them, I don't think that anybody has all the answers or all the experience. But what you do gain from a
Mm-hmm.
number of years of experience doing things like that, and the security work that I've done, is a more educated basis to form your
Yeah.
opinions, right?
Yeah.
to make assertions that are not grounded in, well, because my teacher told me to do it, or that's the way we've always done it, or I this guy, right? Is to see it. And a lot of it is because a lot of things go wrong. In a real fight, a lot of things go wrong.
Oh yeah,
right?
exactly.
You thought I used to think, I give this example now. So, I used to think those Kaju Kembo guys were crazy. They take the punch and they punch him and they punch him and then they break the arm and then they turn him around and they kick him in the back of the head and then they throw him and then they pick him back up and then they throw him again and they stomp on him and they kick him. And I'm like, that's excessive. Fight somebody on PCP and you'll realize that is not excessive. That is just prepared, right? Because some people, they don't, you hit them. You can hit them with, I tased a guy and he continued to run. Like it didn't even phase him. Both darts hit him, both in. Had to get him surgically removed once as a guy on PCP. And he just kept on running, crazy. And I've seen other guys run down a mountain, face plant 3, 4, 5 times. We'd already gotten in a tussle, run across the freeway and get away, right? Because they're resilient. When if they're on drugs, if they're and that kind of experience, fighting with someone that's drunk, fighting someone that's high on any different drugs. One of the things that people don't realize, right, is how, like, if you take heroin or if you take methamphetamines, your respiration goes up. So you're breathing faster and shallower and your heart rate's higher, right? So if I sink a choke on you, you pass out faster.
Yeah.
That's really important to understand. If your go-to is a rear naked choke, if you're like a BJJ guy or something like that, you can kill that. Normally, it takes longer to choke the guy out. You sink that choke, and I choked a guy out, and I barely sunk it, and he was passed out right away. And it wasn't a particularly good use of the technique, right? But he was fighting, and it was the only way I could get him to stop fighting. So I sunk it in. This is before all the craziness around choking is to the point where you can't use choking in law enforcement really at all anymore. But sunk that choke in, and he went limp. Went out, woke up crying, right? How do I know he was on drugs? Because we found it on him. He had an expended syringe on him in his pocket. We almost stabbed ourselves when we did the search, right? That kind of experience, right? Yeah, doesn't make me a better fighter in the sense of anybody else who's been in a fight, right? But it gives me a set of experiences to be like, like maybe I don't want to get body to body with this person. Right, because I don't know what's in his pockets.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
I'm lucky that I didn't get stabbed by that thing in the first place.
Yeah,
and then that's a whole other set of situations where you're at the hospital and getting tested and stuff like that. I ended up having to get tested for HIV and hepatitis because of one of my arrests because I didn't know and the person refused to get tested.
All right.
Right, and that's months. And HIV takes 6 months to clear. Right. And they lost my sample twice, right? So I'm freaking out, right? Right? I'm negative. Just put that on the record. Right? I'm negative. They're like, oh, you're probably fine. I'm like, yeah, you tell someone else that's worrying about whether they might have that, right?
Yeah, that's true.
It informs how I would want to engage a fight. Right? Yeah. Do I want to engage in the fight? Is it even worth it at this point? Right? I don't know where this person has been. Everybody's like so gung ho. I learned my martial arts. I can stand up for myself. So guys, not necessarily. I don't know where that person's been. It's not worth it. They might not have HIV, but hepatitis is much more common and much easier to transmit.
Yeah,
so I ended up getting vaccinated for hepatitis to continue working because it's a regular thing that you get exposed to very easily, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very sharp experience in comparison to a lot of the other experiences I've had. But those things allow you to judge the relevancy of the technique that you're teaching and how that might apply in different situations, right? How that might work and what you're really worried about. Like, how many of you worry about getting spit on? Because spitting can communicate a disease. Is it worth it? It's very, Is it worth it? And, it's not. It's not. Fight with me. I put my hands in my pockets and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want to fight you. Right? I love you, man. Let's not fight. Right? It's not. Ultimately, it's not worth it. Like, did I want to fight the guy? Sure, I want to fight the guy because he's yelling and doing stuff. But I also don't want the repercussions. It's not even the legal part. It's just like I don't know where that person's been. I don't know who he's been with. Yeah. Right? So it informs your training, and that's useful. Yeah. I personally think that, like, It should be every 2 or 3 generations, the instructor should be somebody like that, right? It doesn't have to be every instructor, right? But it's close enough that you can communicate those in a meaningful way where there's a lot of credibility on the part of the instructor that's communicating that. It's useful to students. I don't think students should get in fights. I don't think that I should put them through a fight for anything, right?
That's true.
But your instructor is responsible for helping you. And so if they are not the one that's been in direct conflict on a regular basis, then hopefully they can relate to someone else who has. And that at some point, the person that's taking over the next time needs to have some real. That's why you can't be an instructor in the United System of Screaming without fighting, right? You have no empirical knowledge to base and your assertions on. You know, you've never had someone try to hit you in the head as hard as and fast as they can. How can you tell me that the technique is going to work if you've never had that? Right? Then there needs to be a little bit of that. That means that not everyone's going to be an instructor, and that's okay too, right? Because not everybody wants to risk getting a concussion, right? And I personally concussed a number of my students in the process. I didn't like doing it, didn't want to do it, but they made a mistake in the process of the training, and then once they get better, it's like, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? Could have you done better? Right? How are we going to make this a valuable experience where you do it? Now, sometimes they quit, sometimes they don't, right? But if you have that balance between really trying the art, really utilizing art, and then those that don't, because they're practitioners, you're going to be able to maintain the truth of the art, right? Its essence. Otherwise, it goes the way of wushu, which is mostly just forms.
Mostly just forms.
It's not an art. It's not that the seed there isn't there for that to be an effective art. It's just that most of those practitioners, just like most Tai Chi practitioners, are not efficacious in their movement. Now, Sifu David Leon, he teaches small circle Tai Chi. That guy can make that stuff work, and he'll hurt you if you try to disparage Tai Chi. But he's one of many Tai Chi that I've met, right? So, and it's because it's so far removed from combat. Whereas in Filipino martial arts, I'm so proud of Filipino martial arts. I tell people, I said, of all the cultures out there, name one culture that has documented contiguous history of use of its military art, its martial art of ethnic origin, documented since the 1500s to today. You don't.
That's true.
Right? Krav Maga was created in the 1950s.
No,
right?
It was.
Japanese arts were basically abandoned after World War II out of shame.
Yes.
Right.
It was.
Right?
Yeah.
Bikini tercia is one of the main arts that was taught even today in different versions to the Philippine military. Right. That's such a wonderful accolade, such a wonderful a testament to our culture and our art and how we should stand ourselves up to that particular standard, right? So that way we can be that good example, both in physical prowess and the ability to teach, our efficacy and our techniques, and the purpose that we portray.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Because now, as far as the Filipino martial arts community is concerned, we're the redheaded stepchild of all the events. Oh, we're going to go to jiu-jitsu seminar, and over that corner, there's some Kali. Oh, we're going to do a Taekwondo seminar, and there's going to be right? That's ridiculous. But that's the reality that we live in, and we have to work with.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like, oh, yeah, I did martial arts, but really I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu now. Like, what is that? Right? Like, okay, yeah, I like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You know, I didn't. My uncle then goes, you're going to learn jiu-jitsu under Professor Jean-Jacques. I'm like, not so much. This is like 2014. I didn't do that, right? I got knives. And then Apollo goes, no, you're going to learn from Professor Jean-Jacques. And I'm sitting there at the Jolly Roger on whatever street that is right by the school in Marina del Rey. And I'm going, I came here because I wanted to be a student, and I'm doing all these things. You know, I'm being a human, right? I'm like going, look, my dad taught me this, so I don't need to do that, right? And I'm going, but if it was my dad and they were my teacher, my dad go into any style, pick any name, right? Go do foot fist way. I would have just said, okay, I'll go do it, right? So I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll try it, right? So I do like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's a lot of fun, but at the same time, there's this wonderful culture. It's just Filipino martial art, and it's in all the movies, but no one knows what it is, right? And it has this beautiful history, right? That shaped not only the Filipino-American War, the Spanish-American War, right? Not only shaped wars before that against, Magellan and all that stuff, it
Mm.
shaped World War II,
Mm. It
right?
did.
It's shaping popular culture today in movies. And yet, if you tell someone that doesn't do martial arts, oh yeah, I think I might take out a kid on the I heard of that. Or you go, yeah, I want to do karate. Oh yeah, I see. Have you been watching that Karate Kid? If you say I want to do Kali, they're like, what's that?
Mm.
That's unacceptable.
Mm.
Unacceptable, right? So we have so much to be proud of. It's just wish that everyone knew that we had something to be proud of, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, I've been, um, I was in a documentary from made by the History Channel. So
Mm-hmm.
we were at one of the episode I was playing Japanese, and the other one I was playing Chinese. But if
Mm-hmm.
you look at our fight choreography, it was actually Kali, or it was
Mm-hmm.
actually Filipino martial arts,
Yeah.
and then we just
Yeah.
yeah, and we just made the last post as either Chinese or Japanese. So, but yeah, it was Filipino martial arts, and
Yeah.
everybody went, yeah, it was Filipino
And
martial
they're
arts.
like, I want to learn kung fu, and you're like, yeah, that's great. I don't teach kung fu.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, some went. Oh, what kind of kung fu style was that? No, that's Filipino martial arts. So they had a bit of a shock there.
Yeah,
But yeah, but anyway, so this has been a very good interview with you, Sir Jason. I must admit, because we managed to dig in deeper with regards to ethos when you're teaching, and of course, for those who don't know Inayan, the Inayan system. I just like, I mean, I don't know much about it, but talking with you, I mean, I'm really fascinated with it. So it's because it's you're not just teaching fighting skills. You're really you're trying to basically get the most out of the person, and basically bring them to a different level. So something like that. Not just skill wise, but also like the emotional, the psychological, and the mental side. So which is really important in martial arts. I do believe that.
and
So
that's that whole mind, body, and spirit
yeah,
that
mind, body, and
we
spirit.
have in
Yeah,
all of our Filipino martial arts. Everybody does that. Just fortunate
yeah.
enough to have a good teacher, my father, and my own research that leads to an actual process for that, which is
Mm,
sometimes lacking in
yeah,
systems. You know,
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It is very interesting. So what are your plans now? We're past COVID, so about
so
like classes in future seminars, workshops.
right now I teach in Los Gatos, California. I don't really advertise my school. I talk about it on my social media, mostly Facebook and some Instagram. If you just Google my name, Jason Inay, I think I'm the only Jason Inay on. I know I'm the only Jason Inay on LinkedIn, but that's my professional. There's almost no mention of martial arts in that, but and then it's in at Inayan Base on Instagram, INAYANBASC. So I talk about it there, and then I have my online Patreon membership, which we're eventually going to migrate into our an in-house website, and that's mostly to support our students, but also to create an avenue for people at only like $5 a month, introductory wise, to have access to some of the things that I teach, so that way when they come to seminars, they get discounts if they're in there, but they also get to they get a feel of what it might be like to train with me. And
Yeah,
then I'm doing seminars like I see is it Aubrey Carbonell? What's her name?
Aubrey.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I believe she's in Las Vegas. We'll be in Las Vegas at the end of the month. Aubrey over at Las Vegas Kung Fu. So doing seminars, we're trying to. It was difficult. Like right before COVID, I had plans on a regular location, and I'm still working on that in New Orleans. We go there annually, and then an annual visit to Florida again, because I used to travel there on a regular basis. I travel regularly to Wisconsin a lot still, and then I'm working on with a good friend of mine and Patrick's, actually Patrick's best friend in life, Keanu, who's in the fight choreography. industry in British Columbia, so Vancouver. So we're working on some of those things there, trying to plan out a seminar string in Europe again as we
Okay.
recover.
Well, let
We're
me know
still
if you're gonna be here in the UK.
well. I don't have a host, so we'll have to work on that. So
Yeah, we can work on that. We can
right,
work on that. Yeah.
a long-standing group formerly under Guru Simone Schlottels, who was a very close friend of mine, a very dear student of my father's and mine, who passed in recent years. And so her two students, Katja Wilms and Christian Maringer, they're over
Okay.
there in the Joy Landerach area, Aachen area. And so maybe I'll see Carl over there since he's online here, right? And then there's a
Yeah.
gentleman out in, I believe Stuttgart is the other area that I have an affiliate that likes to host me sometimes. And then I've got my guys in Portugal. So, Spain, and then there's a guy in Italy too. So maybe that'll happen again. I'm not sure. My after COVID, like I put a priority on my relationships than I do on teaching.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Because, in the belly of that, almost no work and, barely making it. And like, do I eat the can of beans tonight, or do I eat this because it got really bad for that? I realized what was more important was, my family, my daughter specifically, and my mother, and my sister, right?
Of course.
And more so than the teaching. But I am still trying to get out there and teach and do some things there. I was talking to one of my friends in the Philippines, Jomar. He was saying I should come out and visit again out in Manila. He was over in Tagaytay. So, those are the things that I'm looking forward to. I'm always open to building out new relationships. Yeah. We really want to a regular visit in Texas. We have a gentleman by the name of Alan Rojo, Karo Guru Alan Rojo, out in Texas, as well as all of our great people like in Milwaukee, Guru Peter Sorcy, and master gurus out there in like Green Bay and Madison, Wisconsin as well. So we go and visit all these people that have been with my family for in excess of 30 years now. Like, that's crazy to even think about it. I just like they started with my dad, but they've been my students for 22 years, and I didn't even think about it. It's crazy how fast things go. I mean, I don't look old enough in most people's eyes to be having students that have been my students for 30 years, but I do, because I've been teaching since 92, right? So, hopefully with, post COVID, we can go out there and teach and really, my father had a vision for the Inayan system of Eskrima. And I remember telling one of the other guys, I think it was Russ Rhodes, might've been Hans, said, I have this vision, this idea, and the only person that's going to be able to take it in that direction is Jason. Right. So, I try to stay true to that idea that he has of, this growing, living art that exemplifies the warrior ethos and set of values, right? It's like I love that scene in the Oath, right, in the Kingdom of Heaven with Liam Neeson and Amanda Bloom, where it's like, tell the truth even if it leads to your doom, kind of idea, right? That's just this. That's to me is like what my father really exemplified in terms of his understanding of the warrior ethos, the ability to sacrifice oneself to, in this case, the art, right? As opposed to going and trying to be lauded by others, right? That doesn't matter, right? It doesn't put food on your table, right? So that's hopefully my goal is to do that, build out my classes here in Los Gatos. Don't really have a lot of private lesson bandwidth now. I can maybe have one more time slot left. I'm not sure. And then just build out my group classes Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays is when I teach my classes. So,
yeah. I mean, if you got any like announcement for seminars, or even like if you want to post the link of your Patreon to FMA's discussion, I mean, feel free to do so, or send it to me. Then I'll promote it. And if you got like, I don't know, online lessons or
it's on the Patreon is lessons. They're like little technique lessons.
All right. Oh, that's good.
Actually, the DVD sets that I have are time released every couple of months, and so I have filmed 9 sets or 9
Yeah.
takes or whatever, and they range from 45 minutes to an hour and 50 minutes. Most of them
Okay.
are an hour and a half range, right? And 4 of the 9 of them are already on the Patreon site, so they release, periodically. So
Okay.
but that's at the silver membership. You have to be a $30 a month member for that. So you get all the other stuff. And right now we're trying to publish all the self-defense stuff because we just started compulsory self-defense programs for a local private school for high school kids that are
All
outbound from
right.
college. So every one of those kids has to learn the 9 System Screama self-defense modules in order for them to be ready for college because of the advent. I mean, like, your kids are grown now, but you understand that when I say that, at least in the West, it's 25 to 30% chance that your child will be assaulted in university, right? And that could be just a verbal assault, but it also can be a physical assault. So now the question is, that doesn't sound so bad. Maybe it's just a verbal assault. But if it's your kid, are you playing Russian roulette with your kid's life and their experience? No, you're not. You want your kid to do that. So this private school has made it compulsory for them, and we hope to open that program to a number of other schools. We have it fully documented, and we've got we've got this proof and concept with this very well respected private school, right? So that's kind of our goal right now, is working on getting that to happen for them. I mean, I'm really not teaching them a Screama per se, but the first goal is to make sure that they can go home. That's the most important.
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I don't care if you call it, kung fu, or if you call it karate, you call it, I don't know, just go home.
Yeah,
Family,
exactly.
right?
I wholeheartedly agree with that one. There's one question here. Are you going to re-release your flexible weapon video that was coming from Glenn Gutierrez?
So I have 2 actually. One that's was privately done at Los Positos College, filmed by a guy by the name of Craig Coutil. And then I have another one that I released. I released it as Backyard Productions with Guru Peter Sorcy. One of my. I have very fond feelings for Peter. He's a great human being. But I'm supposed to work with EM3 Videos to take those 2, which I am sorry, Val, I haven't been very good about that, but take those 2 to get them remastered, right? So I just got to give them the old, and then create another one, because those 2 are with the bandana. And since then, I've become an instructor in Majapahit Silat under my Uncle Dan. So it'd be really interesting to add the Malong and the Sarong to the skill set right there.
Wow.
Now, that was, I didn't, all the bandana stuff is stuff I learned from my dad, right? And the stuff that I learned in terms of the Malong and Sarong is really, there are some additional movements and training methodologies that I learned through the Majapahit program. Very, very similar, almost exactly the same techniques, but kind of a little bit wider breadth. So it's very interesting. The interesting thing is the Filipino Malong and Sarong, or the Indonesian one, it's a looped cloth instead of just a stripper cloth.
Yes.
So, but I like the bandana because that's old Filipino thing. Like you take your money and you tie it up in the corner. And then you go. I like the relevancy of that for the culture. I mean, that's why I call my Dumog system Spider Dumog system, because as kids we do. We take the spiders and we fight the spiders. How do spiders? You grapple, and they use weapons. They use their fangs. They use poison, right? So that to me personifies Filipino grappling more so, right? It's like I like the relevancy of the culture, right, for the naming and the training. But that would be kind of the direction. I didn't catch the name, but that would be the direction that I would be going in. You can always hit me up on Facebook and Instagram. I'm pretty responsive. And then there's my one of my best friends, Sandra. She keeps track of. She's now living in Arizona, but she keeps track of the Bay Area School of Eskrima Facebook page. And so when there's messages there, she'll make sure that I answer them if I miss them. So if people have content requests, I usually put that stuff eventually on my member page site, or I put it up for free on my YouTube channel. On YouTube, it's just Inayan Escrimador, Inayan Escrimador with a K, right?
Yeah.
ESE.
That with a C.
Right. So
Okay.
yeah, those are the ways to reach me. I'm a really responsive person, and again, most of my students will note that, unless I'm going through something or doing something, I usually answer within an
Yeah.
hour, if not immediately. That's your experience too, right? Like usually you message me, and it didn't matter what time it was. I'm like, oh, I'll just answer it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The phone sits right by my head, right? So, and I don't sleep well. And once I got past 40,
Yeah.
I don't sleep so well anymore. So,
Yeah. That's why sometimes when I message, it's like, oops, it's gonna be like midnight there now or 1 a.m. and then here you are responding.
mhm, yeah.
So yeah.
Unless I got a meeting at 6 o'clock for my day job, then I'm responsive. So,
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for all those informations. Just remember, you can send them to me or post it in FMA discussion, so we can help you like
certainly I'll
promote
get
it
it.
as well. Yeah. Now
Right.
we do ask this question as the very last question to every guest that we have. Um, what message can you give to the FMA community? It's not really a question, but like your thoughts. So
It's my experience that the only way, unfortunately, the community ever really kind of joins together is when there's either an opportunity financially, or there's a way to be lauded in some way with a title or with a medal or a trophy or a plaque or something like that. And that serves its purpose, right? But I teach for the system and for the culture, right? Uh, it would be wonderful to see a culture that is less tribal. It would be
mm,
wonderful to see a culture that is more interested in efficaciousness of the art, and to harken back to the traditions of World War II, where we helped the Allies be, victorious over the Axis, right?
yeah,
That our concern is the whole purpose of the United Systems Agreement and its genesis is in the preservation of martial culture, right? And for my father, that was the preservation of the ethnic identity of the Filipino American, right? And the Filipino anywhere in the world, right? Where we have a wonderful and rich culture and history to share. We don't want it appropriated by others, but at the same time, we want it to
mm,
be something that contributes to the world, right?
yeah,
If we foster that that kind of feeling to the betterment of uh, um, individuals, whether they do one art or another art or one system or another, because in the end, it's not your grandmaster that's fighting or building the reputation today. It's you, the individual,
that's
whether
true.
you're a
Yeah.
beginner or you're a master instructor, where they call you grandmaster or they call you, hey, that guy, or they call you kuya, whatever it is that they call you. Those labels are not material. What is material is that there's a rich history in the Filipino martial arts and Filipino culture that is not always identified. And I had a student say, the problem with us as a culture and why people have a hard time is we don't even know what to call ourselves. Are we Kali? Are we Eskrima? Do we spell it with a C? Do we spell it
Mm,
with a K? No, our niece, and then we argue about it. Oh, Kali never existed. Who cares? Honestly, let's talk about the Filipino martial culture, and let's talk about a more appropriate. Let's talk about how we're a welcoming society, friendly people, right? That's what Filipino
mm,
culture is. The door is supposed to be always open. There were so many
mm.
students of my father's that my mother opened up to them, fed them, treated them as children who they would be ashamed to talk to my mother today. This is not the way that we should be.
All right. Okay.
This is not the way, right? This is not the way that my father had wanted either, right? Be
Mm,
friendly, work with each other,
yeah.
put the best face on Filipino martial arts. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about this art. That's what my
Yeah.
dad's mission was. Wasn't there? That's why he was not. He's well known, but he wasn't like the super famous teacher, right?
Hmm.
That was never his goal. It's never been my goal either, right?
Yeah.
Give to the art, and the art gives back. That was his message.
Powerful.
More,
That's powerful. That is powerful. That's powerful. I mean, on that note, once again, I would like to thank you very much for coming in as our guest.
Thank you very, very
In
much for
in
having
this,
me.
yeah, yeah, it has been a very very it was a fantastic interview with you, and basically managing, as I've said, managing to not just talk about like your system in a superficial level, but we managed to really get deep into it. So really do appreciate it.
Well, I'd love to do it again. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope that
Yeah,
everyone
of
enjoyed
course.
it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we can have you and Guru Roger at one point.
That'd be fun.
Yeah,
And do something
definitely.
where I can drink whiskey and have a cigar at the same time. Now.
Yeah, okay. I will try to work it out with Guru Roger. Yeah, and
Sounds.
see basically what theme we can come up with. Yeah,
Oh, sure. That'd be great.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so enjoy the rest of your day, Suro Jason, and thank you very much once again for coming.
Ingat,
Okay,
auf
bye bye.
Wiedersehen.
Ingat, ingat. Yeah.
Bye bye.
Okay, so guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I know I went like overboard. I mean, it's more than 2 hours now for the interview, but I do hope that you managed to get a lot of like information and a lot of a lot of stuff for you to ponder on as well when it comes to teaching martial arts, especially Filipino martial arts. So this is episode 268 again with Suro Jason Inay of the Inayan Screamer System, and this is Guru Tom Pena. So one, if you missed this and if you want, please share the YouTube channel to your friends and for you to listen, for them to listen as well to Suro Jason's interview. Until the next one, have a nice day.